Welcome to today's Mind Your Career webinar program. My name is AdamSylvain and I work with the Alumni Career Development Team here at the University of Chicago in Hyde Park. I'm delighted to welcome you to our webinar entitled How to Write a Compelling, Convincing LinkedIn Profile and Networking Prompts. Today we'll hear from Executive Coach and UChicago alumna Anne-Marie Segal. Anne-Marie partners with board candidates, attorneys, senior executives, and other professionals to facilitate career transitions, advancement, leadership, job interview preparation, resume writing, and personal branding. Anne-Marie is the author of 2 career-related books, Master the Interview, a guide for working professionals, and Know Yourself and Grow Your Career, the Personal Value Proposition Workbook. She is a member of the Forbes Coaches Council, writes on career and resume topics at Forbes.com, and has been quoted on CNBC.com, Monster, Above the Law, and other media outlets. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to cede the floor to Anne-Marie.
Didn't hear that. Had to take myself off mute. Here we go. Thank you. So welcome. We're here to talk about how to write a compelling and convincing LinkedIn profile. Interestingly enough, I gave a personal branding presentation recently and asked people in the 7 C's, which I'll go through in a moment, if there was one that they've had some trouble with and wanted to understand better. Compelling was the word that someone came up with. So I want to make sure to make it so that you all know what compelling is. The power of LinkedIn. So I want to just start here. You may have seen this slide from the prior presentation. LinkedIn is really where you want to be. The LinkedIn profile is often the first step in an interview process. I'm not going to read every bit of every slide, but I want to pause here for a moment. When you make your first impression on people, often we think our first impression is somewhere further down the road, but they've actually gone and looked us up online first. And so LinkedIn, it pops to the top of the search results for many of us because LinkedIn itself has search engine optimization. So people are looking at your profile. The statistics I hear are 75% of hiring managers and 90% of recruiters. Obviously, some of us are using LinkedIn for other reasons. We're thinking about internal promotions or clients. So again, you are going to be seen on LinkedIn and probably by a wider audience than you expect. I'll be talking a bit about those other audiences, but as the title suggests, most of us here are for job search. Relevant sections, the most relevant in most profiles. So the headline. If you have changed jobs recently, you want to make sure that you have written your own headline. If in fact, you're not interested in just having your title and your company name as your headline. The reason a headline matters is because it's what people see when they search for you, and it's how you build your credibility in the first instance. You see this headline here, this is mine, CEO // I'm reading this out this way because I have many clients. I give them the headline that I think they should use and they forget the spaces. This is something that it's like a pet peeve of mine, but I try not to be didactic about it. Spaces, meaning spaces between words, meaning line spaces in your summary. These are the sorts of little details that you really need to get right, because when someone's looking at your profile for the first time, remember, this may be their first impression of you. Or if they're refreshing their impression of you, if they haven't spoken to you in a long time, you want to make sure that you get this right so that they can feel that you're credible to present to their audience. So when you're looking at your profile, don't just proof it for spelling, proof it for that as well, making sure that visually you're creating an attractive presentation. So that headshot, and we'll go through this more, summary, and then some other areas. There are obviously niche things like patents and different sections in the profile. We won't have time to go over those today, but certainly you want to be using the same principles we're talking about here when you address all of those sections. So here are the 7 C's that I mentioned above. Concise, clear, compelling, cohesive, often conversational, credible, and consistent. I promised you I would tell you what compelling means, and compelling essentially means that your audience is going to want something from you. They're going to want to hire you. They're going to want to connect with you. You have different goals in your strategy, and often many goals for LinkedIn. A compelling profile means that you have done your job right to make your audience want to reach out to you or respond if you are the first mover. And I was telling Adam, I have this water bottle that I use often. Many of you have used thermoses just like this one, right? With the top that screws on. If you use it for coffee a lot and then you put water in it, you've had this experience, right? Or you put soda or tea in it, and then it tastes like whatever you drank beforehand. If your brand is pure water, for example, or pure something, right? You're very much the real deal in something, and it still tastes like coffee or tastes like something else. That's what I'm talking about here with the attention to detail, with getting things clear and concise and specifically credible, that you are credible to your market. You want to taste like, I'm going to keep raising this last time, you want to taste like whatever it is that you're saying, not literally, of course, but you want to come across as exactly the way that you're branding yourself. And so this seminar, this webinar is much about being in the driver's seat on your brand. I say consistent at the bottom. It's not only important to be consistent throughout LinkedIn, and many of you who know me already know I was an attorney before, so I use this analogy sometimes. It's like writing a legal brief, and maybe you've read one even if you're not an attorney. But you make an argument and then you support the argument below. And they need to match up, and whatever you say below needs to support what you said above. Same thing here, your headline, your summary, your experience section, and everything else you put on it. And if you have the handouts, one of those is about attachments. A lot of the mechanics about attachments, but also the strategy. Your attachments need to, again, just like exhibits, right, in a brief, they need to support the argument that you're making for your brand. Why do I say need? Because if you don't do it, you're not going to be compelling, you're not going to be cohesive, you're not going to be credible, and you're not going to be consistent. So take a look at that, and there's some other handouts I'll mention during the course of the webinar. I also want to give you an overview from this perspective. LinkedIn, it's only a platform. Again, in my experience working with clients, a lot of times someone will say to me, and this is kind of a preview of what we'll talk about more further, I'd like to move from one field to another. I don't know what to put on LinkedIn. Sometimes the answer is, okay, so this needs to go on LinkedIn and this needs to be tweaked here and this should be said this way, and make sure you add in these 3 things. Sometimes the answer is that you need to do work off the platform. For example, maybe volunteering in the new field or somehow getting experience or making more connections and then bringing it back to LinkedIn. So when you think about your brand on LinkedIn, to be authentic, it's not that you package yourself in a certain way and you wrap it all up and it's a present and there you go and there it is. But what's inside, that digging deeper matters in some ways more than what's on the platform. And in some ways, the platform itself, the medium is the message. In some ways, it's about what you put on the platform. I want you to be thinking about both of those aspects. So I mentioned personal branding. The way I think about personal branding is you figure out what is your value proposition, and then you wrap your brand around it. So LinkedIn is like a spin-off of your brand. And I have an excerpt from one of my books in the handouts. It's about the idea of personal value proposition. And it's these 3 points: what you want, what you offer, and the needs of your audience. I call it market in the book, your market, who you're marketing yourself to. And the reason in particular that you might want to look at the excerpt is I go through one individual in much detail about how he could develop a brand around those 3 ideas. So feel free to take a look at that further after the webinar. Here, what I want to talk about is its application to LinkedIn. What you want. your professional goals and priorities, right? So this is essentially, where are you trying to go with your career? A mistake that many people make on their resume and on LinkedIn is that they are telling their audience what they did. Your audience really doesn't want to know what you did unless it goes to credibility. They want to know what you can do for them. I'm going to say this again because it's a very important point. You don't want to give a laundry list of what you've done unless it builds the argument for this second, more important piece, which is what you can do for your audience, right? And that's why we talk about accomplishments. That's why we talk about strengths. This is the what you offer in the second prong here. Your experience is important, but really only to the extent it addresses the needs of your audience. It's a vehicle for you to show them that you can meet their needs. And so the needs of your audience, when we talk about networking and connecting, can have many, many different needs. When we're talking about job search, really they're looking to fill a certain role and they want to know that you will be the right person for that role. So let's get into that a bit more. Before I do that, I do want to stop and talk about priorities. I have this slide here. So what you want, I have an intern actually working with me and he pulled these out. Independence, adventure, you know, you can read them all. It's funny because I did this same thing before with the cards. It's a set of cards from a coach that I know. And I had very aligned values. My values were autonomy and freedom and things like that, which makes sense because I'm an entrepreneur. What are your values? I suggest if you're having trouble writing your profile that you might want to think about values, and there are many different value sorters out there online, or you could be doing this yourself. Again, when I talk about LinkedIn on the platform versus off the platform, if your priorities do not match the needs of your audience, it may be that you're not writing your profile the right way, or it may be that you're in the wrong career, or that you're not thinking big enough about your role. Maybe you need to be thinking about how to direct yourself so that your priorities and your audience can match. And again, I remand you, if you will, to the book, the excerpt from Know Yourself, Grow Your Career on that point. So value prop and the needs of your audience. Here's one of many individuals that I have in the slides, and the handouts have more information about this. This is the final handout of 5. LinkedIn profile writing. I have 2 more that I'll be adding, and Adam will be sending out after the webinar. 2 individuals responded to me this morning who've given me permission to use their profiles and share this with you. These are not profiles you should be copying. I'm not suggesting that you should call yourself, you know, I am X with Y years of experience in, and then, you know, following this. It's not a formula. I'm not going to say that you should start with mentor, teacher, manager, leader, etc. The idea is this individual was very effective using the half sentence structure, that high resume language that we sometimes call it. You don't start with I, you don't start with he or she, you start with the verb and end, or you just have a sentence fragment. He's very effective at telling you what he does, getting in the keywords, getting in the markets, and at the end, he gets in his military experience as well as some of the places he's been before. This individual did not need to go out and pound the pavement and generate jobs. He can not only get away with a shorter summary, but in fact, some senior executives decide that they'd like to have a shorter summary because they want to show I'm not really out there. I don't want to sound marketing. I would say there's some truth to that. Sometimes it's often just a shorter summary will help you really formulate your value proposition. If you're not really focused on, and I'm not saying Michael isn't, but being a good writer and getting out there and expounding on your value proposition that way and getting into a professional narrative, but you really just want to have something there that's strong and conveys your value prop, this might be a way to do it. I also want to mention the starting from your end game idea. And this is just another way to look at the same idea of the value prop. Who is your audience? What do they need to know about you? The fourth one, oh, sorry, who else is your audience? I should mention this. We think about our audience as a certain set of individuals. For example, if you are in the science field, some type of science career, maybe you think your audience is other scientists, or it may be people in academia, or it may be, if you're in industry, it's people that are going to be interacting with you on a daily basis. Don't forget, obviously your audience is the algorithm, hopefully obviously. Artificial intelligence and machine learning are part of LinkedIn. That's where all the keywords come in, machine learning your activity. So that's an audience, that's a level of review. There's the HR level of review, human resources. Those individuals are very important in the process. They may or may not be really savvy to what you do in your job. And so you need to make your words, your presentation approachable for them as well. When we're thinking in the context of clients, it may be that the final decision maker has a very different view than the person who's told to go out and see who might do a sort of thing that they're looking for. So you've got to think about all those different levels of review. Back to bullet point 4, do you want to fit in or stand out? So the individual above, right, this is fitting in, right? This is, he looks the part. As I said, his brand, there's no coffee smell, right? He is pure water. He's pure, he's in finance. He's really getting a very strong, capturing his brand in a very concise way. Maybe he instead wants to stand out. And again, not this individual in particular, but say he wanted to change and do something completely different. Obviously, you have the concern that you don't want your employer to know that you're out there sometimes. But certainly he may want to be more creative in his profile, bring in other things, and we'll talk about that more. Another way to stand out is the thought leadership concept, right? If you want to be seen as a thought leader in your field, even if you're not looking to change, you may want to stand out a bit more. Again, staying credible, but maybe instead of this, well, maybe this is a color that stands out in financial services, but instead of this, something with a bit more pizzazz. What are you hoping to gain? I always want to emphasize the strategy aspect. Why are you on LinkedIn? Why are you here? I see, the number of attendees here today, each one of you individually and anyone listening to the replay. What are you looking to get out of LinkedIn? Because if that's the end game, right? If you know what you're trying to do, and very granular here, are you trying to generate more leads? Are you trying to bring people to your profile, or do you just want them to, once they get to your profile, say, oh, right, this is who I expected. This is the type of person that I want to hire. The individual that we talked about above, for example, is in that category. And then what do you think you can credibly pull off? So you'll see further along, I have some very creative profiles. They may or may not work for you, depending on what level you are in your career, essentially how much gravitas you have, what your risk reward, what can I say this, risk reward ratio is. That's a tongue twister. That sort of thing. You want to be really thinking about that. So let's get into this a little more, because I know this is a lot of setting the stage, but it's all important because you want to frame it this way. So traditional versus creative, first or third person. You can start with I, you can start with he or she. If you start with I, and that's the recommendation of most of the people in my field, people who write professionally for others related to their careers, first person is more engaging. It's not always the right choice. Sentence fragments we've talked about a bit, and we'll get into this more as we go through more profiles. 2,000 characters is the max. You may want to max out, and again, you may want to be more concise. If you have a dual purpose, so when I talk about what do you want to get out of this, obviously we can say, well, I'm open to many different answers to that, but if you really are trying to dual track something, You want to be thinking about how to use this summary, which is what people are going to be drawn to most after your headline and your headshot. How do you employ that to those two ends? And what do you say, what do you emphasize more, and what do you say less or emphasize less? I have two things below just to think about. I mentioned one of them, overzealous monitoring by a current employer. You don't want to be out there so much that they see it. And some people have compliance issues. Hopefully you know if you are one of those, you need your profile read by your internal team. If you're not sure, check your employee handbook or whatever relates to that. Drafting sources and inspiration. So I actually was speaking with a client this morning. We were going through interview prep, and we went to the job description, which is point 3 that I have here. And the job description basically said almost nothing, right? It was useless. It was a kind of second tier role. There's a, not to mention the field, but there's a top role, the person in charge, and the one right below it. And it sounded like this person was going to do almost nothing. When I say job descriptions, I mean the ones that really describe, right? So you want to get a body of job descriptions together that really show you what the roles are looking for, right? What the individuals, your target audience, are looking for the type of roles that you're targeting. So you take the first the first drafts, the latest drafts of your resume and the earlier drafts, because sometimes if you want to go back in time, LinkedIn gives you more space. You might want to fill out some of those earlier roles. That's a strategy decision. You want to think about other profiles. That's why we have some examples here today to inspire you. The job descriptions, the meaty ones that really tell you what you want to know about the type of roles you're looking for. And so essentially, again, if this is like your first interview, if every job description wants you to do something that you don't know how to do or you don't have in your background, that's a gap that you need to figure out how to address. Off LinkedIn, right? You need to find a way to fill that gap and then put it onto LinkedIn. Maybe it's by taking a course, maybe it's by asking for more work at your current company, but the job descriptions are really helpful for you to try to frame what your target audience needs are in that triangle of your priorities, your strengths, and their needs. Company and client research. So with the same individual this morning, we looked at the company. The company itself, it was very hard to figure out what they did, where they made their revenue, essentially. We found out that they had been bought by a VC. Well, she said VC, it turned out to be PE. By that, I mean venture capital, private equity. A private equity firm bought them. So then she started to look into the private equity firm. And, this is helpful for LinkedIn if, in fact, it aligns with overall what you're looking for. If it's an outlier, it may be that you add a word or two, but you don't want to frame around it. So you're thinking of the universe of target audiences and how to kind of get to all of them, but really have your goals in mind as well. Stream of consciousness is great. You can really be, if you're intimidated by putting something on the page, if you just don't know where to start, or you start and you get through it and you don't like it, forget about writing for LinkedIn, just write. Just write and write and write about these 3 things: your goals, your strengths, and the market needs. And then you can take that, revise it, and weave it into your profile. Performance reviews, these are also great sources of inspiration to figure out who you are as an individual. And one of the big differences between LinkedIn and resumes is that resumes, I said they're not a laundry list of what you've done, but they really are about your accomplishments, and they're very specific. They kind of have a way that they are drafted, other than a few creative fields where people can do things differently once in a while. LinkedIn summaries can show your personality much more. And I don't mean what you do at home on the weekends. That's not necessarily what your personality is, but what are you known for? What do your colleagues say about you? And I have one example further down where the individual actually put testimonials on her summary. That's a way to do it, but it doesn't have to be that's that you're actually putting testimonials, but rather thinking about the ways that people consistently describe you and how you can get that across. Showing is always better than telling. So when you think about, oh, I want to show that I'm high energy, maybe you do, call yourself high energy. I saw one profile where someone called herself high energy, and then she had her banner, which is the piece above your headshot. It was a motorcycle. Clearly, she's showing that she's very high energy. She's a risk taker, those sorts of things. That might work for some of us, not all of us, but that's an example of showing, not telling. Also, when you describe yourself, you can be giving examples of situations, differentiating yourself, and showing your traits without just kind of stringing them along in a line. Feedback from others is kind of an informal way of doing that same thing if you don't have performance reviews or if they're not yielding the results that you're looking for. So to get into some profiles in specific, here's a banner right above her head. This is what I was talking about here. She has both a quote and she has a lovely image. It doesn't, it works in different formats. If you've got someone looking on a device versus looking on the computer, it scales and it changes based on the where they're looking at it. But it really shows strength and grace. I mean, that's what I see in it. And certainly when you're looking at an image, you want to, and I was on a group call with this individual at one point, and we all had that same take on it. You want to make sure that whatever you see in an image, that's what your audience will see. So sometimes you want to vet these things, as well as your headshot. You want to vet that actually what you think you're conveying in your headshot is what the audience is seeing. So you might want to send it around to a focus group, if you will. Kristin also, she is all about words in some ways. She's very artful with her language, and you see this here. I'm not going to go into this in much detail because I did put notes in the handout about this, but you see she starts with communicator extraordinaire, and she ends with, I always use my words. And as you go through, you see that she very expertly weaves in all of these different roles that she's held. This is someone who was in law school, worked for a short time as an attorney, went from the US to Europe as an expat spouse, and then came back. And she's done a lot of different things and is back in the workforce in a highly professional way. And so she's trying to make sure she gets credit for all these different experiences, draws it all in and weaves it together. So again, I don't suggest that you start your profile the same way she did, but to read these different examples and see if you can pull out, like reading the tea leaves, what can you pull out that makes sense for you? This is obviously a very different way to do it. So here we have paragraphs. The third paragraph is longer, but she's good at breaking them up so that you have space and you can really see what you're reading. And then this individual, bullet points. Appointment and litigation attorney who executes, and she goes on. Trusted counselor, skilled draft person, creative defense counsel, experienced advisor. 4 different ways of framing her. And she gets into more detail here. Then she talks about her client base, her community service, and she quotes some statutes for us. Very artful way to do the profile, very different and also very effective. Here's yet another one. First person, hi, I'm Rachel. I love, so she's obviously that high energy that I talked about. Here's how she's showing it. I love. And she goes into, I think it's 6 here, right? Product management, etc. She goes through the different areas where these are the core, the fundamental parts of her value proposition. And then she says she's currently building Dojo Mojo's next generation of products, next generation products. And then you see at the top, she says, head of product at Dojo Mojo, I'm hiring, because she's using her profile not only to build her career, but she's also using it to build her company and build her team. And I talked to her about this, and she's very deliberate that she wants to attract talent to her team who feel, who are aligned with what she wants. I say feel because she's a very, she says, I love, she's very much passionate about what she's doing, and that's the type of individual she wants to attract to her. So very effective in that way. And again, very different than the two above. Here's yet another different idea. This is Gary. Gary has his own company. He's CEO at Brighter, Sustainable and Impact Investing. So this field, I said in the handouts, it's a crowded space. I realize maybe that's not a word you're as familiar with, some of the audience. By space, I don't mean the space that's allowed on the profile. I mean the field is very crowded. Financial services, financial advising, portfolio management, a lot of individuals do this. He's already differentiated himself with the tagline Sustainable and Impact Investing, which he has both in the banner, that's the blue part above, and in his headline. But then he takes a very different view of how to present information. Imagine, imagine, imagine. And then we launched Brighter Investing to do just that. The full summary is in your handouts. I put some here. I wanted to make sure you could read it. He gives examples. He gets into more detail, draws you in, and then says if you're investing for your future or you want to learn about it, we want to hear from you. Do it for yourself, your children, and future generations. Very compelling. And then you can grow your wealth and make a difference. We'll show you how. Usually I don't like the idea of using and as capital letters or using any words as capital letters. And probably, if you've been through the University of Chicago or any similar program, you've been told not to do this. The problem with LinkedIn, or the unfortunate thing to some degree, is that LinkedIn doesn't support underlining and bold and italics and different ways to set off text. So you're somewhat forced to do that if you want to have certain ideas emphasized. Again, this is really about your value prop and how you present yourself. What I mean by that is, we all, think about cars that people drive. We all have a different car we're most comfortable in, the one that matches our personality. You want to know about me? I drive a Subaru at the moment, right? Not a Corvette. And so we all have our different ideas. Same thing on LinkedIn. How do we present ourselves? I don't want to get into that. There's Strengths Finder and everything. What kind of animal would you be? I don't mean you have to be doing all of that to understand yourself, but you probably, if you've been paying attention in your career, have a good idea about this already. So maybe take a bit of a risk, sometimes get a bit out of your comfort zone, but certainly make sure that it's credible and it matches how you would present yourself in an interview, how you would present yourself to your target audience in all those other contexts. Here, as you see, very different. I juxtapose these intentionally. Brighter, and it's yellow and blue. Here, Hyunju, very different, right? She has a very elegant, muted color palette. And she says, I support leaders to make the transformative inner shifts that make outward success possible. And then she goes on and she mentions clients she's worked with, and she's the individual I said who has 2 testimonials here in her summary. Very convincing, completely different way to go through this same 2,000 max characters in a summary. So I hope you're starting to see that there's no one way to build a profile. There are many different ways that you can get to your goals if you start with, what am I trying to do here? So I know Hyunju, and these are not all my clients. Hyunju is not my client. She's a friend and someone who went to school with me. We've talked about what she's trying to do and how specific she wants to get, how broad she wants to be as far as who she's looking to attract as clients, who she wants to work with, what she wants to offer. And so I think she's been very effective here. I believe further down in the profile, it may be in her experience section, she talks about yet a different niche that she serves. You can certainly do that because you want to be thinking about, as I sometimes call it, your major and your minor. What is the main goal that you have? And then if you want to attract things that are related to that, find a way to fit that in. And I'll talk about that further in another slide. Headline. So now that we've gone through some of these, and I haven't really gone through all of the headlines, but you can see them. This is how she describes herself. This is Gary. Here is Kristin. Kristin has Director of Operations at CalPAC. This was the best headline for her rather than coming up with her own. As I mentioned, sometimes you just want it to be that. And after much deliberation at this time, she decided that was the best one. But often people, here, Counsel. She again uses her title and her company. Counsel is a word that's frequently searched for. So in this context, it's great. She could put employment and litigation counsel if she wanted to pull it out. That might give her more hits. Again, it's dependent on how you want to present yourself, how, whether you want to be very concise, how you want to generate SEO and the like. SEO, similar to SEO, search engine optimization, how you want to be found, how you want to get people to you. She's head of product. So a lot of these, I'm not giving these as perfect examples. Not everybody here has developed their headline out in a way that they could in order to show all the diversity of their value prop. Sometimes it's enough to have it really just describing you. Head of product, again, something people would often search for. So for your headline, take an expansive view of your career, if in fact that meets your strategy. Make it easy to read. So if there's a word that you really, really like, it's a way that it's something that describes you. I had a client for one time who said, I think of myself as a consigliere. And I said, Mafia? The Godfather? I mean, that's what I think of when I hear that. And it's funny because she hadn't really thought of it in that context. Maybe to many of us on the call, on the webinar, that seems obvious. But there are other keywords that you may say, oh, this really, really describes what I do. And when people read it, they say, I have no idea what you're trying to convey here. So be very clear when you think of those 7 C's again, above. Be very clear and make it easy to read. Credible. Optimize the use of space to really be compelling and reaching your decision makers. So when they're searching for you, they're using that search criteria, they can find you. And when you're in a list of individuals that pop up based on that search criteria and they read your headline, it's compelling. It makes them say, that's the one, that makes sense for me. Referencing the company name, sometimes that makes sense. Sometimes your company name is so well known that it doesn't make sense to leave it off. Technical or substantive areas, or sometimes industry, those are things that you might want to list. Again, you don't want to be so broad that you don't really give enough information to people to understand what you do, but you don't want to be so niched that you've shut yourself off to other opportunities, or you've maybe applying to a job in one area, but since you call yourself something very different, you've lost the credibility. Should you use the whole character limit? I would say most of the headlines that I write are probably between 50 and 100 characters, 80 maybe. Sometimes 118 is really what you need because you've got a couple of different things that you want to get across because you have different hats that you wear. Again, you don't want to be trying to capture everything. You do want to make it comprehensive, but it's not a game of how many things can I throw on the wall and then see what sticks. You have to communicate to your audience what you want them to know, but sometimes you do hold many roles, and I'll get into this more in a further slide with another example. So here's another individual who she has title at company, ILFA lawyer at Freshfields, and the rest of that company name. The word lawyer is a great keyword, as I said above. If she were to try to expand this out, she could use the example that I have on the right. Again, this could give more information to her audience. It could educate them about what she wants to do. In her case, She wanted to be much more open when she had this up. She wanted to be able to apply to many different roles, so she didn't want to limit herself. In the introduction to the summary, the same idea: international dual qualified attorney with solid and diverse legal and business experience that spans 3 continents. So again, she's talking about the 3 continents, she's talking about the international. It's a bit redundant, but it's not getting into specifics that might limit her job opportunities. After she leaves the firm, she could maybe use the example I have below. I say this in part to give you these 2 ideas of how the same individual could take similar information and draft it in different ways. Here's the person who has the really complex headline. I won't read it out to you, but you can see it here. Many different roles, they all wrap up together, and he really gives you a sense of his value prop in this part of his summary, where he says, my clients are fearless. They hire my team for something truly groundbreaking. This is an individual who has an extremely differentiated offering. You know, he's the needle in the haystack, and it took him a lot of time to figure out how to express that. This is the current iteration, and here's some more about his summary. This is how it starts. I help people envision and design the future with elegant technology-enabled solutions. I'll let you read through this further. Again, an example, not something, you know, he's got the copyright on this, but a way to think about different presentations, and he does use the headers that are in caps, I am known for in my firm, etc. Job titles, we've gone through this a bit already, but here's a slide on it specifically. Often you want to give more information to your audience so they really understand who you are. And again, it powers the SEO, it powers the algorithm. Headshots. Hopefully this picture's worth, or these 2 pictures are worth 1,000 words. High quality selfie on the left. You know, I'm not someone who's always, oh, my nose is so big, but you can see the poor lighting, what it does. It draws your attention away from my face. It draws it to, you know, the hair up here. The shadows are very distracting, as opposed to the professional headshot on the right. You want to be not necessarily getting a professional headshot, but certainly thinking about the principles of photography and how they apply to LinkedIn and how your image will look. And again, this is your first impression, so you want it to be a great one. There's some more intro fields. You don't have to race to write these down, but I do want to make sure that you think about this. Every single thing that's in your profile, someone might take a look at. So don't miss any of the fields. I've gone through this as well. I want to just have this slide here to emphasize you're not the only one going through this if you're trying to brand for multiple targets. Many of us, when we're trying to write our profiles, we feel like, wow, you know, I have it harder than anyone else. It's not really the case. Almost everyone that I write for has a complex background and a complex idea about their audience. So I just want you to know you're in good company if you're trying to brand to multiple targets. Here's related experience, and this is AdamSylvain, who's running the webinar. I mentioned this in the prior webinar. He talks about this prior to his current role, what he did. This is in the handouts as well, and you can really see a way to weave in if you have a, as I call it, a minor versus a major. Here it's really about his prior experience, but how to draw in different parts of your background. This again, this slide is really to say there's a lot that you may want to say about your recent role, and you may have issues addressing it. There are many different reasons, and don't feel like you're the only one in that situation. I'm going to save this for questions. We'll have time for questions in a few minutes, and if someone has a specific question about this, I can certainly answer it. I want to touch on this really briefly. So with skills, you want to be thinking about skills because they actually are important to the artificial intelligence of LinkedIn. And if you are on premium, you can see what skills the job posters are putting up. So just like I talked about the job descriptions, you can go through and see what skills they're listing and what might be helpful in your profile. If you don't have premium, you can probably get it free for a month and certainly do this if you don't want to have the cost of maintaining premium. Recommendations are really important. I have this slide here. Obviously, none of these are the full recommendation and they don't give you a lot of detail. I do want to mention the last one speaks to my prior background as an attorney. I have a lot of people who say, do I just keep the most recent recommendations that speak to my current value proposition? No, you should definitely be having all the pieces of your value prop there. And if you're changing careers, if they said something good about you then, and they're a credible individual, then you can expect that that will continue to carry. But you can hide earlier recommendations. Just type into Google or another search engine, LinkedIn help recommendations hide, and you'll find out how to do that if there's one that you no longer want on your profile. Wanted to have some time to get into networking, and this is in the handouts as well. And the handouts also include a couple of other things, adding attachments and LinkedIn tips. What I'd love you to take a look at both of those. Your attachments, as I said, should be supporting your value prop. Networking asks, this is what you shouldn't do when you're trying to network on LinkedIn. So certainly networking, you're building off of your brand, right? When you're looking to reach out to people, you want to make sure that you're communicating in a way that's consistent with however you've branded yourself on LinkedIn to begin with. So one thing that, that's disjunctive is if, for example, and I have in the earlier slide, the person who she's in corporate America and she's also a yoga teacher and now she's looking to move into nonprofits. If her LinkedIn profile is all about corporate America and she's reaching out to her network and saying, I want to get into nonprofits, can you tell me someone I should speak to? But her brand on LinkedIn is all about corporate America. That's not going to speak well for her. She really needs to figure out how to work in that new piece, even if it's, as I should with Adam, further down in the profile. It's not front and center, but a way to work it in. That's how you match the brand. And here are some things that you want to make sure that you don't do. I say kind of in the middle, don't expect anything. Networking should not be transactional, another bullet, but the same point. You're not looking for them to do something for you, and then once you get it, it's over. It's really a bigger relationship. And so these are essentially ways to be thinking about it, and a checklist, if you will, to make sure that you're hitting those points. Don't waste their time at the end. This is really a summary of the above in some ways. We're all so busy, we're not going to respond to someone who it looks like they don't know what they want and they haven't asked something that's appropriate to ask of me, and they're going to just be wasting my time. Those are the types of networking requests that usually get ignored. So here's some examples of things that might work. And I want to be clear that these, I'm going to go through some rather quickly. These are not, oh, you should write it like this. They're different contexts. It depends on the relationship in the slide above. And that, again, that's in the handouts. It depends on what your ask should be in the particular context. But here's some things wrong with these when I say rewrite or not. Clearly wrong in every context. I applied last week. Okay, so why are you just writing to me now? I see you have people in your network, including one in accounting. Unless you know the person really well, that sounds a bit stalkerish. You want to be careful there. The second one is curious and open. I always suggest this, whether you're in interviews, you're asking tough questions, you've got some red flags, or even if you're trying to start a conversation. Open and curious are ways to do it. So that's the message, that's the brand, and that's the tone that's taken here. Same thing here, very open. Richard Donovan, in my estimation here, and this is the introduction of the last paragraph at the bottom, I'm assuming that he didn't recommend this individual. Otherwise, you'd put his name up at the top. Richard Donovan suggested I reach out. So this is where you this is a bit assertive, but this is where you might decide to go ahead and reach out directly to a recruiter if you've applied for a role. This is the sentence here about what you've done, and it's more specific in the handouts. Oh, actually, I don't think, Adam, I'll add that. I don't think I included that. I have an example of what you might put on open candidates, what you might put in that 300 character space to reach out to recruiters. So here, again, you're going to really tailor it to the market that you're looking for. This is a recruiter internally. Much better than the piece above. It's just 2 sentences, and it's all about you. I even say, I want to tell you all about me. Make sure it's about your audience. Here's another one, I need. Okay, we don't start with that. And it's not flattery here, but it's really why I'm reaching out to you is because I consider you an expert in this area. So you're giving him an idea. And then you say, I'm on a quest to improve. Make sure if you make that strong of a statement that it's actually true, that they don't circle back in 3 months and, now you're on a quest to do something else. And here's my last one. How to get back if you've been out of touch. This is a source of consternation for many people I work with. I haven't talked to this person in years. How can I reach out? Just do it. Not to steal a phrase from a common, someone we all know. Just reach out. Make sure that, see at the bottom, I've got this, wanting to reconnect. Make sure it's not transactional, but you do want to get right to the point and not do a bait and switch, which is one of the things I had in the networking ask list. Not, get back in touch and then a month later, suddenly you need something. So, make it very clear and obvious. So here's some further resources that I suggest. I do have a site coming out in the summer. I haven't settled on all of the details, but at some point maybe you'll hear about it. You can certainly go on my site, my main site, and look for it if you're interested in online learning or continuing this journey. More about me, which I think Adam has told you as well. So Adam, open for questions?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks so much, Anne-Marie. We do have a few questions, and we'll get through as many as we can here before the end of the hour. So starting us off, and we did have one question. I'll just say this point real quick. At least one of our attendees asked where those handouts that have been referenced can be found. So they're in the control panel, in the GoToWebinar control panel. There is a tab there, a handouts tab, and you should be able to access all 5 handouts there. If you have any issue accessing them before the end of this webinar today, I will also be sending them out in the post-event email. So just know that. All right, so let's get into it. The first question that we have comes from an attendee who writes, I want to use LinkedIn while I am still in the informational interviewing stage of my career change. I've been told that's like hanging out a shingle saying, help me figure out what I'm selling. But that's my career change stage now. Any ideas?
I can tell you, there's a phrase I say to clients over and over again, and this is a mantra for you. I'm undecided, not confused. Right, so the reason that's important is because you can ask people in the informational interview stage, I really have these 3 areas of interest, for example. I'm having, I have reasons I like point A or point B or point C or these different paths. Here's how I might approach it. So you've thought through it, you've shown you've done diligence, and you're asking for their advice, but you're not asking them to sort out for you what you should be when you grow up. It's a very different approach. And so that would be my best advice on that.
Great, thanks. We have another attendee who asks, I'm a middle-aged Booth MBA. There has been a 4-year gap in my employment due to a choice to attend to family caregiving. How important is a chronology of occupation to build credibility or any other reason?
Oh, so I'm thrown a bit by the chronology. I assume they're talking about the most recent role, so I'll answer it that way. They may be talking about things earlier, and if so, they could probably type it in the chat box and you could let me know. But the most recent role, I wouldn't say that you need to be, and certainly you shouldn't be, giving all the information about everything you've done in the past 4 years. it does behoove you to have something in your recent role, because often when, if you're working with recruiters, for example, if this is a job search, they might say only people who are currently employed. Unfortunately, that bias still exists. Since 2008, it's been much mitigated. A lot of people are very, very talented, and for some reason, and the job market's shifted. It wasn't just in 08. People are starting to understand that preference for someone who's currently employed often isn't the way to get the best candidates, but it's still there. So you want to have something current, you want to let people know what you've been doing, but it doesn't mean that you have to cover all 4 years. So if you don't have anything that's professionally related, that's strong, that could relate to your target market, this is where I talk about, developing something off LinkedIn and bringing it online. You want to find a way to get there. I don't know what that will look like for you. It could, as I said, look like courses or volunteering, or it could be consulting work. It could be some kind of a temporary role. Could be a fellowship. There are a lot of different ways, but finding a way to get back in there. And then if that's current and you have a gap, you might want to think about a way to describe that gap, that sabbatical, if you will, and feel free to contact me offline if you need some help with that. I can give you a kind of a standard way that you might do that.
Great, thanks. We have another attendee who asks, how do you tailor your LinkedIn profile if you are currently employed by a company but trying to start your own firm? For example, how do you promote yourself without letting your company know you're going to move on soon?
Okay, so it depends, right? To some degree, it depends on what you're starting your own firm in. So, you could be, did you tell me what she's in now, Adam? What is she in now? Or this person, he or she?
I don't think they indicated.
Say you're in financial services and you want to be a baker. I know someone in the town next to me that was an attorney who became a kosher baker, opened a bakery. Obviously, those are so different. It would be hard to really start to market the new business, but she could draw in the interest in the other area. There could be ways that actually shows up in the profile, ways to show that interest. If it's that diverse, if it's more that it's really very similar to what you're doing, like people who are at Google or Amazon and the like, and then they later go on to launch their own thing, you want to start describing yourself in ways that show that you're entrepreneurial, to show that you're client service oriented, to make sure to get in the things that really relate to that target audience. But if you are concerned about your current employer knowing, you probably don't want to do anything that would tip them off, because you want to have your job security until you're ready to leave.
Great. Well, it looks like we have probably time for just one more question. So apologies for those who submitted questions. I had to get through as many as we can. But our last question: I've retired after 35 years as a successful nonprofit CEO, and am now doing some consultation. Any suggestions on how to portray my title and experience as a retiree?
Sorry, he's retired after being a successful nonprofit CEO. I'm not catching if you said a gender, but
Sure.
Then,
It's she actually. I've retired after 35 years as a successful nonprofit CEO, and am now doing consultation. Any suggestions on how to portray that title and experience as a retiree?
As a retiree. So it's interesting because she says as she's doing consultations, but then she's calling herself a retiree. So, I'd want to be very clear on the target audience. She's probably not going to be calling herself a retiree. I don't know what the nonprofit was. If it was like the United Way or Habitat for Humanity or something else that we've all heard of, maybe even that she calls herself, it's something related to consultant, and then former and some short name of the company, because that will build credibility. Sometimes you can reference that former bit. When she's talking about the consultant, I talked at the beginning about industry in different areas that you might be involved in. Maybe she describes that a bit more in what she's doing as a consultant. She doesn't need to put part-time or retired or anything else. She could, in her summary, talk about how she had this long-standing career doing the nonprofit work, talk about the leadership skills or whatever value prop came out of it and how she's now turning this into her new business. And maybe talk about her new fresh approach in this, phase of her life. I find maybe a even better way to say that, but if she wants to explicitly reference it, but there's no reason she needs to.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for everyone for participating. A special thank you to Anne-Marie for sharing her expertise on building an effective LinkedIn profile and these suggestions for networking on the platform as well. We are taking a short break from our programming next week to roll out the red carpet for Alumni Weekend. That begins next Thursday, June 6th through Sunday, June 9th. I hope many of you are able to join us on campus for festivities, tours, lectures, and more throughout the weekend. We will be back on Wednesday, June 12th to debut our Summer Young Alumni Career Development Series. So this series includes 12 events from June through August geared toward young alumni and professionals looking to take the first or next step in their career. Topics include behavioral interviewing, salary negotiation, applying to graduate school, and public speaking and presentation skills. Please visit our events page at careers.uchicagoalumni.org for our most up-to-date schedule of events. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.